Ukraine and Russia are exchanging fire on multiple fronts. Bridges are being destroyed, cities are burning, and oil depots are under attack.
Rescue workers say one person died and 26 were injured. Biggest Russian drone and missile attack of the war. Ukraine says Moscow fired 550 drones and 11 missiles overnight.
What happens when a country with no stealth bombers and limited missiles decides to strike one of the most heavily fortified Russian nuclear bases? That's exactly what Ukraine set out to prove with Operation Black Swarm. But the story isn't just about drones. It's about imagination waging war against overwhelming firepower. The moment their radar screens went dark for just a few minutes changed everything. So how did this fragile plan spiral into an international security crisis, oil surges, and NATO alert levels? Let's break down how it unfolded and why it changed the rules of modern warfare. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now back to the video. The strike that reduced Ukraine's most advanced drone plant into rubble came without warning. Within seconds, the first wave of Caliber cruise missiles arced across the night sky, escorted by swarms of Shahed drones that cluttered Ukrainian radar.
To Russia launching a massive aerial assault against Ukraine, the biggest since the invasion more than 3 years ago.
All right, in other news, Russia has conducted fresh strikes on Ukraine's Zaporizhia region. Ukraine says Russian forces carried out 567 attacks over the last 24 hours.
At least 7 people were injured in a missile strike, while 2 others were hospitalized, and 23 private homes, 12 apartment buildings, and a post office suffered damage.
Their intended targets weren't random infrastructure or symbolic landmarks. They were 3 key drone production facilities hidden among industrial complexes near the cities of Dnipro and Pava. These weren't modest workshops. They represented months of hard-won expertise, precision machinery smuggled in from abroad, and teams of engineers who had reshaped Ukraine's battlefield presence with their innovations. By the time the attack was over, half a decade of effort had been erased in one coordinated strike. Ukraine's air defenders scrambled to respond, and for a moment it looked like they might blunt the blow. The Patriot PAC-3 batteries cut through the darkness, guided by radar operators working under impossible pressure. Several missiles were intercepted mid-flight, exploding into fragments over the countryside. But the sheer volume of the attack overwhelmed even these advanced systems. For every projectile brought down, 2 more slipped through and found their mark. Precision-guided warheads smashed into reinforced buildings, tearing through steel frames and concrete foundations. Blast waves carried across entire neighborhoods, rattling windows and plunging the region into chaos. When the smoke cleared, the scale of the destruction silenced any talk of a partial victory. Inside the remains of the factories, dozens of engineers and technicians lay dead, their workstations turned into ash. Ukraine had lost more than lives. It had lost the heartbeat of its drone program. Hundreds of unmanned aircraft, either assembled or awaiting final modifications, were obliterated in a single night. Production capacity that had steadily expanded with each month of war was now gone, leaving an empty shell where innovation once thrived. The message behind the attack was unmistakable. Russia wasn't simply trying to destroy drones on the battlefield. It was going after the very source of Ukrainian adaptability. Every new drone design represented lessons learned from the front lines. Lessons that turned civilian quadcopters into armed reconnaissance tools or experimental prototypes into strike platforms. By vaporizing these centers, Moscow aimed to halt Ukraine's ability to think ahead. It was both a practical blow and a psychological one, designed to convince soldiers and civilians alike that improvisation could no longer save them. Satellite imagery released in the aftermath made the point even more vividly. Wide swaths of blackened earth stretched across what were once orderly rows of supply warehouses and assembly hangars. Roofs had been peeled back as if by giant hands, walls collapsed into skeletal structures, and nothing recognizable remained of the precision equipment that had once built long-range autonomous aircraft. The contrast between the empty ruins and the cutting-edge technology they once produced underscored just how precise Russia's strike had been. and how carefully it had chosen the timing. On the surface, Russia's operation looked like a major tactical victory. It had eliminated targets of genuine strategic value and achieved a rare moment of complete surprise. Yet that success carried its own hidden risks. By attempting to snuff out Ukraine's drone capabilities, Moscow may have inadvertently forced Kyiv to become even more inventive. Stripped of conventional options, Ukrainian planners faced an unforgiving question. How do you strike a nuclear power's fortified bases without advanced bombers, precision missiles, or dominant air superiority? The answer would not come from traditional solutions. Out of that desperation grew Operation Black Swarm, a plan that sought not to match Russia's firepower head-to-head, but to rewrite the logic of the fight entirely. And the crucial puzzle it aimed to solve was this: how can low-cost drones, assembled in basements and workshops, bring a nuclear installation to its knees? What happens when 15 homemade jamming drones turn a Russian nuclear base's radar screens dark? That was the first question Ukrainian commanders asked themselves as they gathered in a reinforced underground bunker late one night, staring at maps lit only by red lamps and screens showing aerial reconnaissance. This was not a meeting to study hypothetical scenarios. It was the briefing for Operation Black Swarm, an attack that would gamble everything on improvisation. The decision to strike was not taken lightly. Everyone in that room understood the target was no fuel depot or rail yard. It was a nuclear base guarded by layers of radar, interceptors, and ground forces. Yet after the destruction of their drone factories, the option of waiting no longer existed. They chose a strike that, if it worked, would prove even simple machines could undo weapons of a nuclear superpower. The risks bordered on reckless. The drones being prepared were fragile, assembled from scavenged parts, commercial electronics, and improvised payload racks. Coordination had never been tested on this scale. Commanders couldn't guarantee their signals wouldn't interfere with each other. Fuel loads were small, flight times tight, and even crosswinds might scatter the swarm before it reached its mark. Still, the opportunity outweighed the fear. If they could overload the base's defenses long enough for artillery, bombers, and ground forces to converge, the impossible could suddenly become possible. Phase 1 began quietly. Just before midnight, 15 drones lifted off almost without sound. Each carried a crude but effective radio jamming rig designed not to destroy but to confuse. As they approached the airspace of the Russian base, radar operators saw their screens erupt with signals that made no sense. Dozens of phantom aircraft blipping on and off, appearing at impossible altitudes, disappearing and returning in the same second. For the defenders, it was a nightmare. Their radar picture collapsed into static as warnings multiplied, leaving no way to distinguish genuine threats from ghosts. With the radar scrambled, Phase 2 unfolded in the skies above the perimeter. Another cluster of drones flew deliberately into the paths of Russian interceptors. Each carried a tank mine wired to detonate midair. When struck, most detonated before being destroyed. The blast shredded rotor blades, damaged engines, and disabled several defending aircraft in the process. Even when Ukrainian drones were reduced to pieces, they still managed to take Russian machines down with them. The tactic bought precious minutes, and those minutes opened the door for the next wave. As interceptors fought overhead, Ukrainian artillery crews began pounding the perimeter of the base. Guided by drones that still managed to transmit coordinates, M777 howitzers and rocket batteries targeted fuel depots and supply dumps that lay just outside reinforced bunkers. Explosions ripped through parked fuel trucks and storage tanks, clouding the sky with black smoke. Simultaneously, infantry units and armored vehicles pressed forward under cover of darkness, exploiting the confusion. At exactly 1:18 a.m., the largest wave arrived. 70 explosive-laden drones lifted into the air in staggered intervals, ensuring they could not all be intercepted at once. Moving on pre-programmed routes, they homed in on aircraft hangars, ammunition depots, and vehicle staging areas. Russian defenses, still blinded by jamming and distracted by artillery strikes, failed to intercept most of them. Suicide drones rammed bombers parked on the tarmac, setting off secondary explosions as fuel ignited. Others struck weapons, stockpiles, chemical storage, and critical communications nodes. The chain reaction of detonations echoed for miles as fireballs consumed sections of the base once thought unreachable. By dawn, Nuke Base 22 had gone silent. Radar arrays were offline, bomber wings scattered or destroyed, and hundreds of personnel killed or missing. NATO monitoring immediately triggered security alerts as satellite images captured plumes of fire and destruction spreading from one of Russia's most sensitive facilities. Oil prices spiked within hours as markets calculated the risk of escalation. What Ukraine had executed was not a conventional strike. It was the proof that swarming homemade systems could unseat the defensive posture of even nuclear-era installations. And with that, a larger question loomed. Had this been simply a tactical strike? Or was it the opening of a new era where raw imagination could outgun traditional firepower? The strike proved that cost does not always equal power. When layered with precision and timing, small improvised systems can pierce defenses designed for nuclear-era warfare. The base that once looked untouchable fell to machines built in workshops and basements. If drones assembled from spare parts can cripple a nuclear installation, what does that mean for tomorrow's balance of power? The barrier between nations with advanced arsenals and those without is thinning. Wars may no longer be decided by who fields the largest missile, but by who dares to imagine more. And that possibility is only beginning to unfold.